Welcome everybody, thank you for coming to my session. I am Peter Lindsay and I'm talking about some of the stories behind and the learnings behind Etihad's Agile transformation. But first, a word from our sponsors. So thank you to all the sponsors of the conference. And then on to the presentation. So I'm stood in front of a hotel ballroom. It's a bit bigger than this one, but much the same in many ways. And I'm in trouble. I'm stalling for time because I've run out of things to say. And so I do the only thing I have left to do, which is I tell the truth, which is to tell everybody that I've been trying to buy time because the CEO is supposed to arrive towards the end of our PI planning and make a grand entrance, and he's late. So, having now told the truth, I give everyone a break and ask them to come back in 15 minutes and set the scene. But in many ways, for all the drama, this is actually the fairy tale ending that I've been telling everyone for the last couple of years that we will never get. Yep. So let me go back to the beginning. So my Agile journey started in 2014. I had been in Air Serbia. I've been in Serbia for Etihad, managing the IT department of Air Serbia. And I'd come back and I'd inherited the part of Etihad IT that did digital things, primarily the website in those days. And the way that it worked back then was that every change they wanted to make to the website was a waterfall project, a different waterfall project, right? With a different business case and different scope and different benefits, probably a different project manager and often a different vendor. And it was as mad, I can see recognition on a few faces there, it was as mad as you think it is, right? And I felt that at one point in time, every day behind my desk, there was a group of project managers replanning all of their projects that were all joined together because one of them had a defect, they couldn't get out of the main branch, and you've heard all the stories, right? So the first thing that we did was we implemented Scrum. We had a small internal team that did small change for the website, and we implemented Scrum with that team. But we knew it wasn't going to be enough. That, like all organizations in circa 2017, we were kicking off a digital 2020 program. You all had a digital 2020 program, right? And we knew that our Scrum one team mechanic wasn't going to be enough, and we knew that our project insanity wasn't going to cut it. So we went off and did some research and we made some decisions about what we were going to do. And the decision we made is that we were going to at least start with the Scaled Agile framework. I am sure there are some opinions in this room about Scaled Agile framework. We can talk about that in the Q&A at the end. So we decided to implement Scaled Agile framework. Now, to say that we had leadership buy-in would be a stretch, right? We had leadership give in, right? And to the extent to which they'd given in, we were given one team for one PI to sort of prove the value of this way of working. So we did, just about. And then we scaled up to 3 teams with a little bit of a longer duration that we had to work. And then the wheels came off. I don't know that the statute of limitations is fully expired on some of these stories, but suffice it to say that there were some changes in leadership. We lost leadership buy-in, what little leadership buy-in that we had, and it became quite a difficult time. It became quite an unpleasant time. We went from we were changing the world with Agile to, man, I hope we make it through the week, right? So that's a little bit of the background. Before I go any further, I wanted to set up the talk, right? So what I thought I would do is share with you 3 things that I have learned from doing this over the last N years that maybe we learned the hard way in the hope that you don't have to learn them the hard way, right? Maybe many people have already learned them the hard way, same as we did. So I have 3 things, and within each there's sort of 3 tips. So, fast forward through the story to, it's about August 2019, and we've been chipping away in the background and we've started to deliver. We've delivered some of the key parts of Etihad.com, and we're ready to get on the front foot and start banging the drum for Agile transformation again. So we'd been doing PI planning. I assume everyone knows PI quarterly planning, right? We'd been doing it in Kolkata because frankly it was cheaper and easier, right, to fly the few Etihad people to Kolkata. And our main vendor initially was Cognizant, and we were doing it in their premises. And as we accreted more teams and products to our train, they eventually became uncomfortable with how many other vendors were walking around their campus, and they started renting a hotel ballroom for us to plan in. But on the back of this success, right, we decided that we were going to do PI planning in Abu Dhabi as a way to showcase our way of working, bang the drum for Agile a little bit, get some more stakeholders involved than we were usually available to us. Hence, I came to be stood in front of this hotel ballroom in Abu Dhabi, trying to buy time, doing everything except telling jokes, in order for the CEO to arrive. Eventually, the CEO did arrive, and he watched the end of our planning, and then he said, it wasn't just what we delivered that was amazing, but it was how we delivered it. It was agile. The company needed to be more agile, right? This was the fairy tale ending that I had said would never come. And then it got better because we had a digital director this show was his idea, right? And it was a great idea. The thing that he couldn't have known, the thing he didn't know, is that it would be the first day at work of our new chief digital officer who was coming to join Etihad. And he was in the room for that first time that day. And he said something along the lines of, during my interview process, I was told there was no Agile at Etihad, and here I am on my first day. There's 150 people doing PI planning. This is the future. We need more of this. The fairy tale ending, as I said. So let me set up my first learning, which is you have to lead the change. Because, of course, what had been gifted to us when he walked through the door was the thing that we'd failed to achieve on our own. Right, which was leadership buy-in for the transformation that we were trying to make, which I think is so important. Many, many years later, I was interviewing for an Agile coach, now a colleague, and I remember in the interview, he asked over and over again, searching for, do you have leadership buy-in for the Agile transformation you're trying to make, right? So important. So let me continue with the story. So over the next few weeks and months, we start to shape a formal Agile transformation. And I'm involved in a small way, and then eventually they create a position for a LACE lead, and I apply and I get the job. And my first day on the job is to be, no joke, the 1st of April, 2020. You can all see where this is going, right? Okay, so I'm going to position myself, because I can't watch this. I really can't, even all these years later. So many of you will know, on March the 23rd, 2020, the UAE closed its borders quite sensibly, and Etihad grounded the fleet. And as some of you know, airlines make money by having all of their planes in the air as close to all the time as possible, right? Earning money. Which is why this video is so shocking, because this is every single Etihad aircraft on the ground in Abu Dhabi with the engine covers on. And the thing that I find even more spooky about it is nothing else is moving in the airport, right? It was an interesting time. I'm going to stop that because I really can't watch it. So my new role, my hopes of recruiting an Agile team, engaging a vendor, doing lots of coaching and training, all evaporated. And what happened was we ended up spending the next really couple of years bootstrapping an Agile transformation on a shoestring budget. And as you guys will all know, right, the primary anti-pattern, I think, in Agile is that we are doing Agile without being Agile. And what leadership buy-in, right, as great as it is, gets you is people doing Agile, right? And a lot of our challenges from that point forward are trying to get people to be Agile without perhaps the coaching support that we wished we would have had. Before I go any further with that, though, I think the other part of leading the change is about selling the change, and that means communicating the why of the Agile transformation. So most of you are probably familiar with Simon Sinek's Golden Circles. Yeah, you've seen the TED Talk, and there is a book as well, of course. And what he says, for anyone who's not familiar, is that most companies and leaders most of the time communicate the what, the how, and then the why, right? So we communicate the clearest thing first and move towards the why, which is the fuzziest thing. And he gives an example of Apple, which I will try to do. So if Apple communicated like everybody else, they would say, we make great computers, that's the what, right? They're beautifully designed, easy to use and user-friendly, that's the how. and there isn't a why, right? How do you want to buy one, right? And the way Apple actually communicates is, in everything that we do, we believe in challenging the status quo. We believe in thinking differently, right? That's the why. Our products are beautifully designed, easy to use, and user-friendly. The how. We happen to make great computers. Do you want to buy one, right? Simon Sinek's argument. So my argument is you have to try to do the same thing when you're communicating the why of the Agile transformation. So not, we need to implement Agile, we're doing Scrum and Safe, right? Things will be faster and better and cheaper, and right? But actually to say, well, we believe in working more collaboratively, delighting customers, right, with products that solve their real needs, et cetera, you know how it is, right? How are we doing that? Well, we're going to implement some ways of working. We're going to implement them iteratively. Would you like to join our Agile transformation? Yeah. So this was trailed a little bit earlier on by Matthew, right? The Kniffen framework. So I think this is not very often a good way of communicating the why, but I think it is for certain audiences, right? This room perhaps being one. But I think it's often a good way of understanding the why, right, of why we do Agile. So very briefly, because I'm sure you know it, so a chap called Snowden, amusingly, named his framework the Kniffen framework. Kniffen means habitat in the Welsh language. And he basically says you need to understand which environment or habitat you are in order to know what kind of management approach you're going to take. Yeah? And the four that I think are most important here, so simple. You walk into the canteen at lunchtime, there's a queue, right? We've sensed what's going on, we've categorized it, it's a lunchtime rush. And how are we going to deal with that? Well, that's best practice, yeah? So none of the staff go on a break, we open an extra cash desk, right? That's the simple world. Chaotic sounds very dramatic, right? But actually a lot of IT, there's many IT people here, a lot of IT is in the chaotic realm, right? Because incident management, major incident management, right? We don't immediately know what's going on. We have to take some action. We have to poke it with a stick, right? We have to switch it off and on again. We get some knowledge, and then we're able to, maybe from a run book or something like that, take some action. Where this gets interesting, I think, is complicated versus complex. Matthew mentioned it earlier in the sense of evolving our ways of working as opposed to evolving our products, right? Which I think is even more interesting. But that's his talk, not mine. Complicated. I think a lot of the world, a lot of our industries, really for the last 70 years or so, has been in the complicated realm. The airline industry is certainly in the complicated realm. We have fleet planning and network planning and schedules, right, and crew rostering, and we fly all these planes around the world and we fill them with fuel, and then one of them goes tech and it can't take off, and etc. Right? That's complicated. But the relationship between causes and effects are potentially knowable. Right? They might be separated by time, they might be separated by distance, they might be complicated, but we can understand what's going on and we can make decisions. And that's where scenario planning, experts, best practice maybe comes into it. My contention is that complex, which is where we are increasingly moving into, is where Agile plays well. Right? So in a complex realm, things are only retrospectively coherent. There is no way to understand the relationship between causes and effects in advance or even in the moment, right? Only retrospectively. And therefore, we must be experimental in our approach. And I think that's what we see everywhere, right? I think financial markets are like that. I think modern warfare is like that. I haven't experienced it. And certainly if you are building digital products or building products that a large number of users will use, I think that's the realm you're in. And I think that's our reality. And I think that's our why for Agile. So we need to communicate. Yes, it's there. The burning case for change, right? Why are we making this change and why is it urgent? So that's another thing that we have learned. Okay, so this is perhaps more dramatic than it needs to be, right? The art of war, Sun Tzu. To know your enemy, you must become your enemy. Keep your friends close and your enemies closer. I think this gets misused a bit. I'm probably about to do the same thing. It particularly gets misused when people use the second half of it, right? I think the first half of it is more interesting, and while the language is a bit dramatic, I think it speaks a little bit to what Kotter calls building a guiding coalition, right? We need to build a guiding coalition, and I think the reason I included that is it's really easy to see why some people need to be in the guiding coalition for our Agile transformation, but I think there's a lot of value including the people who are the doubters, the naysayers. I wouldn't call them enemies, right? But that's not safe terminology, safe in psychological safety sense. Do we have any architects in the room? Okay, oh, yeah, very good. A few tentative hands there at an Agile conference, right? Architects, I think, don't get me wrong, some of my best friends are architects, right? But architects are a great case in point here, right? Certainly in my experience, they're a little bit of a harder sell on the uncertainty of an Agile transformation and Agile ways of working. But they're a great example of people who see something that we don't see, and if we include them in our transformation and our guiding coalition, they can help us see these problems and solve those problems. Does that make sense?
You're talking about software architects, no?
Yes, absolutely. It's a very important distinction, right? I'm quite happy for actual architects to continue to use waterfall project management, right? It's a good point. Oh, no, there's something else I wanted to say there. PMO, right, in our experience at Etihad, PMO has also been an unusual ally, an unexpected to me ally here, right? Because PMO knows a whole bunch of things that perhaps us idealistic Agile coaches miss. PMO have a deep, hard-won knowledge, right, of the need to trust but verify, right, unlike us idealists, right? They understand organizational processes around funding and governance. You might want to change them, but we can at least start from the point of understanding them. And the other thing that PMO, in my experience, knows is that they understand an organization's need for reporting, and as I'm sure we've all found, no matter how many demos you do, right, the organization's still going to need some reporting, right? Okay, so I'm going to shoehorn this in the banner of collaboration and coalition. So, familiar with the three amigos terminology, right? I think every flavor of Agile has it to some degree, right? So at a team level, it's usually the Scrum, well, let's do it the other way. Product owner representing the work to be done and the customer, yep. Scrum master, facilitation, coaching, improvement, maybe delivery accountability. Not getting a reaction to that. And then somebody representing technical, right? So the team, we hope, right? Self-determining, self-organizing, or a tech lead or a solution architect, right? And it's more explicit in SAFE, which is what we've been doing, right? Where you've got the product manager, the release trainer, engineer, and the solution architect. And we were fooled by I was fooled by our early success here. Because when we built the first train, I was the delivery guy, so I became the RTE. And my boss was closer to the customer, the business, right, the requirements, so she became the product manager. And I had a software engineer who used to work for me who became a solution architect for some reason. So we were the three amigos, and it just worked, right? And I think it worked. Sorry, can I just make sure I've said out loud, I'm not recommending that the product manager is the boss of the RTE. That's not what I'm saying, right? But in our case, it kind of worked, right? Because we'd worked together a long time, and I think we were all really clear that we brought different skills to the party. So when we started spinning up teams and trains, I just thought it would work. And boy, was I wrong, right? So, yeah, people nodding. So I find myself communicating this message quite a lot, right? Which is, whether it's a team or a train or whatever, you guys jointly drive this train. You do not succeed or fail independent of each other. There is no universe where you succeed and you fail, right? It just doesn't happen like that. And I find sometimes the pattern that helps people to understand this is to think of themselves as an Agile team. On a couple of occasions, we've even made them do it. Right? Sorry, that's not very good language. We've encouraged them and coached them to use an Agile team mechanic within that Three Amigos group. That's probably enough about that. So you have to lead the change. Leadership buy-in is a must, right? Communicate the burning case for change, and then establish a guiding coalition, and don't forget to include the people who see things that you don't see. My second lesson then is the work matters and teams do all the work. What do I mean by that? So we started from a slightly unusual place with Etihad, but maybe it's not that unusual. Maybe some of you have similar things, right? So at the point when we started on this journey, we had no Scrum teams. We had no team-level Agile, and we employed precisely 0 software developers. And we quite quickly started doing SAFE, right? Because we're doing a big transformation, big program of delivery. And what that meant in a lot of ways, I think, was that we were building on shaky foundations. And it's very easy to focus, right, at the train layer if you're doing SAFE, or the portfolio layer. because that's where all the action is, it's where all the focus is from management. But if you don't have it in place, the practices of team-level agility and team-level technical stuff, right, is really important. That was a hard-won lesson. Let me share you a couple of stories on that. So back to, it's COVID, right? We have a very minimal coaching staff. We're launching teams and trains. And quite often that means a bit of training, a bit of coaching through your first PI planning, and then not a lot of love after that, right? So I won't name this team, but there was three teams on a sort of little mini train, and I did the training and coached them through their PI planning. And then the extent to which I followed up was, I'm afraid to say, just corridor conversations. How's it going? Yeah, great. Haven't seen much happening in Jira. Yeah, we're mostly in Mural. Well, that's okay, right? Okay. So this PI sort of came to an end, and when I checked back in, I discovered that they hadn't run any of the ceremonies of Scrum for any of the teams, created any artifacts, or for SAFe. They'd essentially taken the PI plan and executed it like a little mini waterfall plan for 3 months. So needless to say, we had some relentless improvement to do with those guys. The other thing I wanted to mention here is that my experience has been that atrophy happens really quickly with Agile ways of working, a lot more quickly than I expected. And I think it happens for two reasons. One is the simple degradation, right? We forget the things that we knew, or we stopped doing retros, we were busy, we haven't done them for a couple of sprints, right? There's that aspect to it. But I think there's a second, more kind of pernicious element to this, which is the well-intentioned solving of problems with solutions that actually take us further away from what we're trying to do. And it's often old ways of working coming back in. So topical on my mind this week, I seem to have steering committees popping up like mushrooms. I don't know what that's about. But my favorite example here is, in the early days of the digital train, we seem to have a real problem with getting visual designs ready for development to start, which created the slightly amusing, it amuses me, it rarely amuses anyone else, situation where we had Scrum Masters running around all the time shouting, I need VD. Okay, we got at least one person who got that. Right, so I had a Scrum Master come to me and say, he didn't have a diagram, but if he did, it would have looked like this. He says, I've solved this problem, right? He says, what we should do is 3 sprints ahead, we should capture all the requirements. 2 sprints ahead, we should do the solution design. 1 sprint beforehand, we'll do the visual design, so we've got VD when we need it. Then do development. Right, you've heard this story, yeah? And honestly, he looked genuinely crestfallen when I told him that he'd reinvented waterfall from the ground up, right? And that his minimum cycle time was now 12 weeks, yes? Which is the most important point. Okay, so that's a lot about team-level agile practices and technical practices. But I almost hesitate to say these things to you because, not that I think they're not true. It's certainly, yes. Just here, like, a little higher. Is that okay? Yeah, so I struggle to say these things, not because they're not true, but I worry about the process becoming the goal as a sort of anti-pattern, right? If we talk too much about agile practices, yeah? So my third learning, sorry, there's the sad face, right? That I think we've learned about the work mattering and teams mattering is that we absolutely need to be laser focused on the product and the customer, yeah? And how that product is meeting the needs of that customer. And I think particularly in large enterprises and particularly in the midst of a big agile transformation, I find that that gets lost somewhere along the way. And I think you can hear it, right? The conversation starts to be about deadlines, about politics, about business cases, right? About the agile transformation, right? About the metrics of the transformation, right? So one of the things I think we've found is, man, you have to really focus on making sure that these teams are very, very focused on the customer and the problem to be solved, et cetera, et cetera. Which leads me nicely onto sorry, that's the summary. We talked about that. Leads me on to the final of my lessons, which is really, it is all about the product. So let me talk you through some of that. So back to, we now have a significant digital train. It's running, and we're we were working with some really good UX guys, right? Not UI, UX, or they did both. And they went off and started collecting data, and they told us something that we should have known and didn't, right? Which specifically, very narrow point, 80% of the traffic to Etihad's website, if you took away people entering the booking journey, was people looking for baggage information. Yeah. So what's my baggage allowance? What are the baggage rules? So that's a great example of my point here, which is that good product management, I think, is empirical. It's data-driven, like the rest of Agile. So then we built a new baggage page that sort of better provided this information to customers. And then we did a focus group, which is my next point about customer centricity. And we had 10 people, there's only 10 of them, and we gave them a prototype of the website, and we said, the scenario is you're going to New York on Tuesday, you're on an economy saver ticket, find out your baggage allowance. And 8 of the 10 people started the process of buying a new ticket, which absolutely none of us would have predicted, right? So that's my first point really, which is, it's not on the slide, that good product management I think is data-driven, it's empirical. And then it bleeds into my second point, which is customer centricity. Customer centricity is one of those things we say, right? It's one of those things that's really easy to say, but I think really hard to do. And I think part of the problem for that is that I'm a big fan of design thinking. I don't know if anybody else is. It's not very in vogue, I feel, at the moment, design thinking. And I feel that part of the problem that certainly we have struggled to embed that sort of customer centricity sometimes is because people associate it with design thinking, and then design thinking I think has a threefold problem for me. The first is, and I'm going to be pro-framework for a second, which is not the theme of today, right? Design thinking doesn't have a framework, right? So it's this amorphous, nebulous, right? So it's really hard to know where to start, right? We can't even agree how many diamonds there are in design thinking, right? Never mind which tools we should use, right? So that's the first problem. The second problem is if people have had some formal education in design thinking, then it tends to be at the beginning of a project for a new product, right? And we all went to a hotel ballroom for 2 weeks and did this thing. And when you start trying to talk people about we should use some of these tools in our product development, they're like, I haven't got time for that. And I think that leads to the third problem, which is when you start talking about using these tools, I think quite often the reaction from people is, it sounds trivial, right? Like doing an empathy map for my customer. I know my customer. So I want to tell you a little story. This isn't an Etihad story, actually. I was doing some work with a little startup, and we did personas, and we did empathy maps. And then we did a current state and to-be state journey map with them. Simple stuff. And in going through the journey map, simple version, we discovered that in a significant number of cases, they'd be handing the customer off to a third party before they'd closed the sale, right? And these were 3 smart guys who really understood their product, right, and had thought about it a lot. But it was the simple act of writing down the journey map and going, well, what's the customer doing, right? What's their motivation? How are we empathizing with them? What are we doing? What's the technology doing? So that's my point on design thinking, I think. The third point I want to make about product management is, and this has come up a lot today, right? I think good product management is experimental, right? Everyone read Lean Startup? Yeah, a few hands, okay. And of course, Lean Startup defines MVP, different to the guy who originally defined it, right? But an MVP is the next iteration of our product, right, that is necessary to test the hypothesis that we currently have. And I think that's super useful. And we have struggled, or potentially we still do struggle, because of the way that funding and governance happens to be experimental in that way. But I think it's really important. We have also gone too far the other way. So after having solved the baggage problem, we moved on to solving the login problem. And we were experimenting and innovating our way to solving the login problem. But looking back, I'm not entirely sure what the experiment was designed to teach us. Was it teaching us that people needed to log in? Well, we know that we don't need an experiment to tell me that, right? And if I'm introducing friction in the booking flow, which is what I'm doing, right? If I'm introducing friction between where they are now and when I get money, I don't know that I want a particularly innovative approach to, right? I want that login box to look like every other login box they've ever seen, right? So there's no cognitive dissonance and they get through it as quickly as possible. So I think one of the things that we've learned is, yes, we need to be more experimental in pursuit of an outcome. I have an outcome I want for my business, which is this, and I think I will achieve this by solving a problem for my users, and I may need to experiment to work out how to do that. But let's be clear about which experiments we're running where we genuinely have a sort of knowledge gap. So, good product management is my third lesson that I learned the hard way. I think it's data-driven. I think we need to find ways to be customer-centric and use these great tools on an ongoing basis day after day, right? And that we need to be to be experimental with build, measure, and learn. So to recap, we've just talked about product. I also talked about the learning that actually the work really matters. Don't get lost in your Agile transformation. That the team level Agile practices and technical practices and that focus on the product and the customer. And then I began talking about, and somebody else has said it today already, right? It is a change management activity, right? And all the good stuff that we know about how to do organizational change management applies here. So that's definitely leadership buy-in, making the case for change, and then establishing a guiding coalition. I think I promised somebody some numbers. So from that standing start I told you about of 0, we now have over 40 Agile teams spread across 7 Agile release trains and some orphan teams as well. That oldest train, the one that I started back in the day, is still running. The name's changed, but they're still running. And this week, they planned their 30th PI, which I think is rather special. And one of the metrics that we look at, choosing my words very carefully now after the conversation today, is predictability, as SAFe defines it, right? So objective level predictability. So aggregated across all of our trains last year, it was 86%, which I find a pleasantly high, but not too high, number that suggests that we're still setting some ambitious goals in there, hopefully. In summary then, I like to say that Agile should make us better, faster, cheaper, and happier, right? We build better products more quickly, with more value, which is a different way of saying cheaper, and then it should be happier. And I think it's imperfect, but we have tried to measure this with a team morale score. And if you read the questions, you'll see what we're trying to achieve is how happy are you with the life that you have in your Agile team and your Agile ways of working building this product. Not, did you get a parking space and how much is your salary, right? Because that's outside of my control for the most part. And I told you a little bit, right? From the wilderness years, from being the voice in the wilderness through some difficult times, through COVID and through everything that's happened since, right? It gives me an immense pleasure that well, the last time we did this, it was also 86% aggregated across all of the trains, right? So if nothing else, right, we appear to be achieving happier, which is people are engaged and motivated in their Agile teams. That's everything that I have. Hopefully, you've got a sense that I love talking about Agile and product development particularly. I'd love to connect with any of you who want to continue that conversation. And I did promise, I even set up, I think, potentially a difficult question. So if there's any questions, I think we have time, right? Yep.
That was very interesting story. Thank you. Thank you. Because I'm in the same position as you right now, into the government organization and trying to study the ICs and techniques What are the questions I have for you? You said that you do register, right? Now that's 40 plus teams. Did you send all those team members training or did you get help? Because you couldn't possibly train 40 plus teams. So how did you go about changing your thinking, getting people to embrace scale their job? And what exactly did you do to get people to adopt this way of working?
It's a good question. He didn't ask me, should I implement Scale Agile? But we are still partly an outsourced company. So some of those people, right, are vendor people that we have not trained, right? I think when we are setting up the vendor relationships well, that we put criteria on the vendor to say you need to bring people who are ready for this way of working. And then we do a kind of simple sheep dip of they need to understand our language and our way of working. For the internal people, I would say there are 200 plus people in Etihad IT. I would say over the last 5 years, I've probably trained all of them at least once, or at least my team has. So we have moved through it. To answer your actual question, training's part of it, right? Training's almost table stakes, right? It gets you to the starting line. I think one of the things that we've tried to focus on and still focus on, which is perhaps more important, is what we call awareness. We have a sort of stream called awareness, which is how are we embedding the mindset? How are we getting people talking to each other, sharing success, more than just training? I think training, you have to do the training, right? But training maybe gets you to doing Agile and not being Agile. So we're quite focused on what comes after that. I don't know if I answered your question.
Thanks very much for the interesting. Well, my question is, any experience that you can share with us about the transformation to Agile within construction companies?
Very good.
Well, you push for that.
You mentioned architect.
I did, and I meant solution architect. I feel not qualified to answer that, to be perfectly honest. But there's quite a lot in the airline that I think you wouldn't sensibly do in an Agile way, right? I mean, some of the software applications in an airline are so specific, right? There's maybe 2 vendors in the world, right? You're buying one of them. They're going to implement that software. They don't know how to do it. You go through, yeah. So one of the things that we've spent a little bit of time on is how, regardless of my way of working, whether it's waterfall or some vendor concoction, right? What do I want to take from that in terms of mindset, right? To think differently, and maybe sometimes that means practices, right? There's nothing in any waterfall methodology that I'm aware of that says you can only learn lessons at the end. Tends to be what happens, but there's no reason you couldn't run a retrospective every 2 weeks. You might struggle then to implement the changes that come out of it, but yeah, focus on the mindset is what we've done somewhere similar.
The reason I'm asking this because there was a debate about in construction, perhaps we can apply Agile and we can move to Agile in certain phases of the project, like the design phase, but not in the execution phase. And that's why I was asking if there's any experience you would like to share.
The other thing, yeah, no, I'm going to leave it there. I'm not going to reach for an answer when I don't have one.
Hello.
Hi.
Actually, I have 2 quick questions.
Sure.
The first one, how were you able to measure your team morale?
So that one I can. Yeah. So basically, these 4 questions, and they score out of 7. There's some theory behind that I don't remember, and then aggregate. We did, and one of the things, it's a really good question, we die with surveys. Everyone else in corporate life dies with surveys all the time, right? So the way that we did it specifically was during our inspect and adapt. So we did it, I don't remember the tool, but like one of these Mentimeter type things. It wasn't Mentimeter. So we did it live because we didn't want it to be another survey in people's inboxes, and we wanted to put it in context. So right at the end of the inspect and adapt, right? So we've done a demo, we've looked at the quantitative and qualitative metrics for the last 3 months, and we've just done problem solving workshops. So at that moment, to try and get a live barometer with a very small, hopefully well-chosen set of questions.
My second question,
Yeah.
I totally agree with the topic that you mentioned, that the customer is we have to focus on the customer. Basically, it's the first principle of Agile. But unfortunately, we are stuck in deadlines and timeline. And I'm coming from an education field.
Mm-hmm.
So we have this academic year and we have this timeline. We cannot go beyond it. So actually, I feel like this Scrum Master, he's working waterfall under the Agile umbrella.
He was trying, yeah.
You have some magic word to tell me how we can solve this challenge?
I don't know. And I was having this conversation with someone at lunch that potentially my Etihad problems are just Etihad problems. Maybe everyone else is really in customer centricity and product development. I think the thing that has been our focus most recently is to not die under the weight of it, right? You could do persona, let's say you haven't got a persona, just to pick a right? You could do that in an hour with a group, right? And get some value out of it. My startup example of a journey map, right? Same thing, right? I think we have to find a way to bring these in small ways, incrementally. That's where we're focused anyway. I don't know if it's the answer.
I'm sorry, this is the last question because we don't have time. Quick catching later. You'll be ready.
Sure.
Hi, Peter. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Peter, thanks for the talk. It's a really good talk. Live examples and no mention of AI. You said that you started gaining traction when you got buy-in from the CEO and digital...
Chief Digital Officer, yeah. We inherited a good leader, yes.
So those are the people at top. You're in at the sort of transformation level on the sort of the coaching side of it. But what about the middle management, the delivery leads, the tribal leads? How did you manage to get buy-in from them on the transformation? And are they the ones running the trades? Are they the ones running the PIs? Because, and part of that is, how did you get out, I'm assuming you did, I don't have, how did you get them out of the delivery mindset to also give you time for innovation? Thanks, Peter.
Okay, let me try and unpack that. So we absolutely worked, I mean, we would have done it anyway, but it was COVID, right? So we worked with the resources that we had. I think in some cases we inherited really willing accomplices, right? I can't stress enough, PMO have been great, right? The guiding coalition argument, I think I neglected architects, right? And I think that, we would have had an easier journey if I'd included them earlier on, which is sort of what I was alluding to. One of my learnings from this is, I think it's a mistake to make your organizational roles the roles that are prescribed by Agile or any particular framework, a mistake we've potentially made, right? That to make it real with an example, if all you have is RTEs and Scrum Masters, there's a whole pile of stuff that needs to happen in any organization, as everyone here knows, right? And you can't shoehorn that into the Scrum Master or the RTE role, right? So you end up with, you mentioned delivery managers, right? So I think one of the learnings is there is a role for people to do something. Some of this stuff, what you call them, doesn't matter. So I think some of those people have found homes in that type of context. We also found, I think quite early on, that people don't go where you would expect, right? If you start changing the structure, we've had people move from the business to IT. We had people who were product people become architects, right? That when you actually go back to the job descriptions and say, well, what do I need this role to do? And then what skills does this have? Right? It's not always a case of the business analyst becomes the product owner, the project manager becomes the scrum master. We've had, if you actually look at it from a job description point of view, we've had some quite interesting moves. But it's a journey, right, that we've all been on. It's not been easy. People have had to learn new skills. I don't know if I answered your question.
This reminds me, we have happiness index at the back as well. Just feel free to take a post-it and then how happy you are with the session so far. And we'll have a 5 minutes break. Thank you, Peter.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
And we'll reconvene with Mohammed and Sarah. They will talk about treatment of processes in 5 minutes. Watch out for the back.
Right.